Hey Tony, it's Thursday. I kind of told you about this the other day, but Tuesday I was ended up doing taxes and ended up, by the time I was done, completely forgot about the video. And yesterday was just a long day. Wednesdays are always a pretty long day for me, so I'm doing the video today. Sorry. So I guess second up to answer your question of the week, I haven't listened to the whole album yet. Like I was aware it came out last year, but it's hard to listen to music. It's hard to listen to music that's not Disney music or something like that. Just because, like, I'm not gonna listen to music like Green Day with a 2-year-old in the car because I just don't think that's really the right thing to do. So no, I haven't listened to the whole album yet, but I'm sure it's good. Green Day's always pretty good. I think the last full album I actually listened to by them was probably Revolution Radio. I think I listened to that whole album once. The one I actually listened to like repeatedly was probably 21st Century Breakdown. But I love Green Day, always have, will for as long as they don't get canceled for any reason. But it's a lot of things to keep up with, and Green Day and some of their music is just not necessarily on my short list of things I want to keep up with. But again, it's most music I listen to is Disney music. So maybe in a few years when Skylar's a little older, I'll start going back to listening to music that I like a little bit more. But that's it's a little ways away still. So what I want to talk about this week is actually a new book that I'm listening to that's really really good, but also brings up some really interesting discussions that I think are really worth having, even today in the year 2025. So the book I'm listening to is Red Dead History. So what it is it's a history book about America, turn of the 19th to the 20th century, during the time that Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2 take place. And it contextualizes the story of the games in, the history of the time. And it's really really good. It's really interesting because, like, I I love the Red Dead games. Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. It's probably like number 5 on my list, but it's so good. And you also know that I love history, and so kind of combining those, it makes it really interesting and to kind of compare it to where we are today. So the way the book is set up is it's set up into 3 different sections because there are 3 different, geographic there are 4 different geographic areas that the gang goes to. Technically 5 geographic areas that the gang goes to, but one of them is on the island of Cuba, is on a Cuban island basically, which didn't the author didn't really want to go into that because it didn't really apply to like the greater thesis of the history of Red Dead. But it and they are also in the mountains, but they were only there for the in the game. You're only there for a short period of time, and it doesn't really have a lot of history and society there. But the 3 areas are the West, the Deep South, and Appalachia. So the way the game is set up is so you might not have played the game. There are two years that take place in the game. There's this main story in 1899, and then there's an epilogue in 1907. 1899 is where most of the game takes place. The epilogue is the last probably 6ish hours of the game, and the like and that's that's kind of an interesting part of the game. So the way the book is set up is it first talks about the West, because the first place the gang goes to in the game is, it's called Valentine, but it's basically like, just the inspiration of a bunch of like, cow towns in Kansas and things like that in the Great Plains. And it kind of goes over, how business interests civilize the West, and made it to be something very different than what it was when it stopped being the frontier and instead started being a big part of the industrial political complex. The part that I'm in right now of the book is when they're going over the Deep South, and I think that's quite possibly the most interesting part of the book so far, Now, obviously, I lived in Ohio for most of my life, and I've lived in Massachusetts for the rest of it. So, I'm no grew up nowhere near the South. But what the book kind of does in a really interesting way is it kind of explains things that happen to, you as Arthur or John in the game, but it contextualizes it with, like, this is what happened after the Civil War, this is what happened during and after Reconstruction, and this is how these, effectively terrorist organizations maintained, gained and maintained their power. And I thought that, like, the chapter that I'm on right now is actually about, organizations like the Klan, organizations like those, those white rifle clubs that were effectively terrorists trying to stop social change and put themselves back on top. And it's really interesting because the way that this the part on the Deep South opens up is a frank discussion on race. And I think you can kind of look at American history and say race is quite possibly been the most divisive issue that has ever faced America. It was incredibly divisive when we were formed. Obviously, we fought an entire war over racism, slavery, and things like that, and it continues to be a huge part of everyday life. And the book really does a good job, like, contextualizing, where it's like, is race made up? Yeah, biologically, yes, but socially and culturally, no. And those who say that, we need to stop talking about this because it's going to make everyone else uncomfortable and then it's going to, cause, less progress, is, in a sense, effectively pushing even less progress, because you can't have a conversation about the history of America without discussing racial divides, not just between, white, black, but also between, white Latino, black Latino, Asian American, and just et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because so many big flashpoints in our nation's history have all revolved around the question of race. And it got me thinking about, like, when you look at history should not make you feel good all the time, because history is not always good. History is often a violent event. It is obviously a disruptive event, and to think of it in any other way stops it from being history and instead makes it propaganda. If you're looking at something and it only makes you feel good, that's just propaganda, because that's not the truth. And I think the book does a really good job of, like, discussing, the violence of America's past and comparing it to the events of the games and the events of today. So definitely recommend it. Even if you've never played the Red Dead games, which you should, they're great. But even if you've never played the Red Dead games, I've really enjoyed it on the historical look at the inspirations for the games. So that's that's all I have for today. So Tony, my question for you is: have you ever watched anybody play the Red Dead games or played it yourself? If so, what'd you think? And if not, you should. Stephen Place did a whole Let's Play of Red Dead Redemption 2, and it's great. So Tony, that's my question for you. I'll see you tomorrow. Later, bro.